Rambam, we continue in giving. The laws of Meiser. Meiser is the tithing laws. Here in chapter 7, as we learned that to tithe 10% after the 2% was given to the Kohen, the priest, 10% is given to the Levi. We learned many different laws about that. Very, idiosyncratic, very detailed laws. And we continue chapter 7. The following laws apply when a person has 100 log of wine that are tevel. Tevel means that they've not been taken the truma and meiser from them. All right, you haven't given your gifts you have not given, and therefore it's not something you can eat from, right? Right, it's not something that you can partake in. According to scriptural law, if they say the 2 lugin that I will separate are truma, right, that's 2%. The 10 are the first tithe, and 9 are the second tithe. He should not begin drinking or leave over the quantity designed as truma and tithes at the end. Right, so, okay, he's got 100, right? From the 100, he's got to give 2, and then 10, and then 9, because the 9 will be the 10%, the second tithe, right? So, which then, makes it all perfect, right? But he shouldn't then start drinking or leave over and, and drink and leave over the quantity. In other words, let me go and when I reduce to the last 21%, I'll leave that over. Don't do that, right? Instead, so he continues and says, instead we should make the separations and then drink. We do not say that the wine he left over at the end is retroactive to consider as set aside in the beginning. You don't do that. The rationale for this stringency, in other words, simply you did it right because you left over, but there's a stringency over here because the obligation to separate truma and the tithes is a scriptural in origin. Since it's a Torah law, right? And with regard to matters of scriptural law, we do not say that we will consider it as if a separation has been made unless an actual has been made. So you can't say you're going to leave the leftover, right? So we're stringent in this, and therefore you have to do it at the beginning rather than what will be left over at the end. Number 2, when a person specifies that his tithes were located at the opening of the jug of wine, he should not drink from the bottom of the barrel. Going the other way. I'm separating the top of the barrel, right? But I'm going to take the spout at the bottom and I'm going to drink from there. Right. Of course, this is not like, Jews from this, they learn how to outsmart anything and any system. All the loopholes and everything. From this, that's not the point here, obviously, right? That's not the point, although you may look at it that way. It's not. It's in order to learn the parameters of the law, right? So he should not drink from the bottom of the barrel, even though he's already set aside the top of it. If he specifies that they are at the bottom, he should not drink from the top. The rationale is that the liquids intermingle. If by contrast, one specified that the tithes for produce were at the opening of the storage container, one may eat from the bottom. If one specified that they were located at the bottom, one may eat from the top because they're not mixed together, right? So if it was loaves of bread, or not loaves because that's already been made, but grain, right? So I took the top, I can take from the bottom. If I set aside the bottom, now the chiddush, the novelty over here is because you didn't physically separate it yet, right? If the optimum way to do it is to physically separate, you took it from the grain from the top and you set it aside. this is for the Kohen, the 2%, this is the 10% for the Levite, and this is the 9% that I'm going to take to Jerusalem, right? That's obviously the optimum way. But again, why are we speaking non-optimum way? I mean, just do it right. Like, because first of all, we need to know the balance, someone didn't do it, so therefore what would the law be? And this way teaches us the parameters, and we understand God's will. Number 3, a person can designate certain produce as a second tithe and then redeem it. Afterwards, he may design the same produce as a first tithe for this batch of produce of Trumas Meiser for other produce. So you designated second tithe. Remember, second tithe is yours, right? For your usage, again, in holiness in Jerusalem, right? When you're going to go for the holidays, so that way that's called taking a packed lunch, right? And you're coming there to celebrate. You want to come without a way to celebrate. And also it's a way of, taking your stuff to celebrate with Hashem, right? But you can redeem it. Why? Because you're going to take a load of stuff to Jerusalem. No, it's a bit of a hassle. So you could redeem it, and now the money becomes holy, right? Afterwards, and you may designate the same produce that you've now redeemed and give it as first tithe to the Levite for this batch of produce, or you could give it for Trumas Meiser for other produce. The Trumas Meiser is the 10% of the 10% that goes from the tithing to the Kohen. Because remember, the tithing doesn't go to the Kohen, it goes to the Levite. Okay? And if you're not confused, that means you've been paying attention. If you're confused, I get it. Okay. When a person sets aside produce to use them for the separation of tithes, he may continue to separate tithes, relying on this produce on the assumption that it is intact, eating and drinking from the produce from which he intended to separate tithes until the entire quantity that was set aside has become tithes. So a person, he's setting aside produce, right? For the separation of tithes.
Eat from that stuff?
Second. So he's taking a bunch of stuff and he's setting it aside. So he may continue to separate tithes, relying on this produce, on the assumption that it is intact. He set it aside. I'm not certain what he means to continue separate tithes. May continue to so he separates now. We can take from that what he separated and now separated because that's what he's going to actually give, and therefore he can assume that's intact, and he eats and drinks from the product from which he intended to separate tithes until the entire quantity. So he took a batch. From that batch, he's now separating tithes, right? So he separates from it. He can eat and drink from that what he separated, because it's not the whole thing's going to be tithes, right? Until the entire quantity is set aside. When he gives that to a Levite, he then gives it to the Levite. If later he discovers that the produce that he set aside for tithes has been lost, he must show concern for all the tithes that he set aside. He should not eat, however, this tithe the second time with certainty. So he took from here, he set aside, he sees that it got lost.
Yeah.
No, he ate from the big batch. He set aside from the big batch, a small batch, right? Then he sees.
Never eaten the small batch at all.
No, I didn't get this. I'm sorry. Come back. When a person lends money to a kohen or a Levite or to a poor person, right? So that he can separate produce for the money they owe, proportions due them. He may continue to separate tithes on their behalf on the assumption that they are alive. He did not show concern that the kohen, a Levite, died or the poor man became wealthy. So person's lending money to a kohen who's entitled to receive both truma and tithes, who's entitled to receive the tithes, entitled to receive the tithe for the poor, right? So they can separate produce for the. So he lends him money, right? Now he sets aside tithes as portions what's due to him. So instead of paying back, he'll keep the portion. He may continue to separate tithes on behalf of on the assumption that they're alive. So he can continue to do this, right? Because they owe, because what happens if they passed away? Or what happens if the poor man became wealthy and therefore he wouldn't get this now? Aha. In other words, he can continue doing this. He lent 100 zoos, right? So instead of paying back the money, you'll pay back in produce because I have to give the produce to you. So I'll hold back the produce. Now, the guy didn't come around. Maybe the guy died, and therefore, guess what? You can't take that produce because that produce needs to be given to a kohen or right, let's say, or a Levite or the poor person because it's the poor tithe, man's tithe, right? In the third and sixth year. If the person passed away or the poor guy became wealthy, so you have to give it to a Kohen or the Levite, right? The only reason you can hold it back is because you sort of like gave it in advance by giving the money. And therefore, but if the guy died, you still have to give this to a Kohen or the Levite or to the poor. So it doesn't help that they owe you money. Maybe the heirs will have to pay it, but you can't do it through the tithes. But we can assume that the person's alive. We don't have to assume maybe they died, right? And he could still do this process of taking the tithes and holding it in the place of the money that he lent. Okay, I hope you got that. Good. Number 6. Yeah, you got that? Achim Hillel? Yeah?
Still running it through my mind.
Okay, I think it's good to be focused in what we're, I don't know if you're ahead, behind, or wherever, but.
No, I'm looking at it, but I'm still not seeing that's clear yet too. So, but no, continue.
Number 6, how should he make the separations on their behalf? He should separate Truma, the first tithe, or the tithe of the poor, and give it to another person for the sake of the Kohen, Levite, or the poor to whom he lent money. If the debtors would frequently take these separations from him, or if he was accustomed to give them the separations to them alone, he need not give them to another person on their behalf. So, okay, he lent the money, right? Now, how should he do this process? Because after all, these produce is supposed to come to them, right? So you have to still separate it, the truma, the tithe, and the tithe of the poor. give it to another person, not to for the sake of them, not that they're going to give it to them. In this way, the produce separated formally becomes a property of the debtor. Even though ultimately the lender will be receiving the produce, he must make the separation so that the main batch of produce will not be tevel. Okay. So you have to separate it from the main batch in order that the main batch will be able to be used, right? So separate it, give it to another person. Now you don't have to give it to another person. That giving to the other person is as if you gave it to who it is coming to. In the end, it's coming to the creditor because the guy is owed money. So that's what you do. Now, if the debtors would frequently, in other words, the Kohen, the Levi, or the poor guy would frequently be taking from him, so he doesn't need to give it on behalf of anybody else for them. Because this is but you still have to make the separation. So it's as if they've already received it, right? But if it was a guy that only from time to time would come, or you would give it to him, but it wasn't the set person that you gave, the set Kohen that you gave it to, for example, then you need that person to kind of like take it on their behalf. After the lender makes these separations, he calculates the worth of the produce he separates and deducts it from the loan. He continues doing so until he repays the entire debt. Okay, then you got to calculate how much is this worth? Remember, he owes me 100 zuz. Oh, this is worth 5 zuz. All right, okay, take that off the 100.
Maybe he's calculating.
The lender makes these separations. Who's
he?
He calculates the worth of the produce and separates and then deducts it from the loan. He may sell the truma to any kind of his choice, and okay, so and then he can also until the debt is repaid, and then he can even sell the truma to any kohen of his choice, right? Because it's his now, right? And may partake of the tithes themselves. The truma, remember, it's his, but the truma is holy, so he can't partake in it, but he could sell it to a kohen. Now he's going to get a cheaper price for it because truma is less valuable because it's got limitations to it, right? As a kohen, it can only be eaten by a kohen or a kohen's household, right? Can only be eaten by a kohen's household, and also only in holiness, right? But the tithes that go to the Levites, that's not holy, so he can partake of it himself. Not a problem. When he calculates the worth of produce that he set aside, he has the right to consider their value according to the lower market price. This is not considered as interest. Sabbatical year does not remit such a debt. Like a sabbatical year doesn't belong to you, right? So it sounds like it's being calculated by the borrower because it's at the value of the lower mark.
Yeah.
Because he has the right. Yeah, I think you were right. Yeah, there's a buyer's bid and a seller's bid, right? So the buyer's bid is obviously lower. So the lender may price the produce according to the buyer's bid. Oh no, it is the seller. It is the one. No, because the buyer's bid is lower, so that means he's paying less of the loan. The opposite. It's not. It isn't the borrower that's making the decision over here. It's the lender that is evaluating it. Remember, the guy might not even be coming around. He lent him the money. He's not coming around for it anymore because they made up a deal. Here's the 100. So for the next, for the next year and a half or whatever it is, so it's going to be paid back. So he's not coming around. So obviously, who's going to evaluate it is the lender, not the borrower. He's not coming around. So he separated it. He's now giving what value? Not the high end. He's giving the low end, which that's going to be the buyer's bid, not the seller's bid. The seller's bid is going to be higher than the buyer's bid, right? So he has the right to do it by that. Huh? No, he's not coming around because he's not going to get it. What's he coming around for? I mean, he can come around to bring together, right? But he's not coming around to get the truma or the meiser because he lent him the money. So he gave it to him already up front, and he said, "This is the deal." Okay.
Yeah.
If the lender desires to nullify this arrangement, he may not. Well, our sages ordained this measure for the sake of the recipients, right? In other words, because he owes him money, so I'd rather have the money. I don't want to have the grain. He can't, if you made that arrangement, you can't now nullify it. Okay? But the borrowers seek to do so, they may. But if the Kohen or the Levite or the poor guy wants to pay back the money that he owes rather than and get the grain instead, he could do that. For him, that's worse. I mean, it may not be whatever the situation might be, but no, dollar for dollar, so to speak, it's worse because now he's got to give back money rather than getting grain and dealing with that. If the owner despaired of receiving payment from them, he can no longer make the separations on their behalf. Or he may not make separations because of a debt that was lost. But if they made the deal, why would he despair from receiving payment? There was a drought, the harvest appeared lost entirely. He made a public statement of despair, acknowledging that he no longer expected to be able to collect the debt because the fields would not grow enough crops. If despite this condition, the fields produce crops, he is not entitled to keep the truma. For the rationalist has already given up hope. Aha. Others, the point being that remember that this crop is in the place of the loan, right? But if you gave up on the crop, so it can't be in the place of the loan anymore. That's the point, right? Because it was a drought. And then miraculously, things grew. If the Kohen, Levite, and the poor person who borrowed money dies, he cannot continue to separate on behalf of them unless he receives permission from the heirs, right? Because the heirs would owe the money, but he has to receive permission for them because the only reason he can do it is because it's replace, like this is truma, this produce is truma or is meiser. So it's got to be treated as such. If the guy's alive and now we can exchange it because of the money that you owe, but if the guy's not alive, so it can't be exchanged for that. Now the heirs would owe the debt, but they owe the debt, but not the exchange. But if they give permission, so now they could do that. It's not automatic. Although I'm not exactly clear why it's not that the heirs automatically owe it. Moreover, even a permission is granted, it is effectively only when the deceased left heirs a tract of land at least the size of a needle. If, however, he left them only money, permission from the heir is not effective. If the deceased left only movable property, the debt does not create a lien on the estate. There's a mitzvah for them to pay the debt. but not binding obligation, hence they cannot traumatize separate. So interesting. The only time heirs are responsible for the debt of who the person passed away is if they have land, right? For whatever, I don't know why at this point, I don't remember. We learned this, but I don't remember. If it's only movable property, then they don't have an obligation, at least biblically. They have a moral obligation, but not a legal obligation. They have a moral obligation, but not a legal obligation, right? Which means if there isn't a legal obligation, so there's no relationship between the heir and the guy who owes the money, vis-a-vis not the payment of the debt, but the exchange of the produce, right, for the debt. That is no longer established, right? So it's not effective. If he made the loan in court on the condition there will be make separation on behalf of the money, it is not necessary to receive permission from the heirs, because he did this in court, so it has the power of the court. So then it's automatic, exactly. If the poor person became wealthy, he may no longer separate the tithe for the poor on his behalf, even though he made the loan in court. The recipient may retain the funds in his possession. Because if he did it in court, what's he saying? I'm saying you're poor and I have to give second tithes. I'm giving it to you. He became wealthy, so he no longer can get the second tithes. Yeah. But since you did this in court, so you've established that the payment method will be this exchange from the money that I lent you for the produce. That's the method of payment. Now that he became wealthy, right? Wealthy means here that he can no longer get poor man's tithes, right? Doesn't mean like he became a millionaire here, right? Became middle class, right? He's no longer can get this. Well, they made up the method of payment is this, right? It's not about paying the money; it's paying through the produce. So therefore, the method is nullified. Therefore, he doesn't have to pay the debt legally. That doesn't mean morally he shouldn't. By the way, doesn't mean morally. We're talking about from a legal standpoint.
That's applying the loan to a poor person.
Yeah, well, he said he did this in court. Remember, this agreement between the poor guy and the owner of the field, he lent him 100 zuz, right? On the condition that I'll take the poor man's tithe as repayment. But he became wealthy, so he can't get it anymore.
So specify poor man's tithe.
Yeah, no, it's only poor man's tithe we're talking about.
But specify.
Yes. Wow. When an Israelite tells a Levite, I'm in possession of a core of tithes for you, the Levite has a right to designate that produce as Trumas Meiser for other produce, even if he did not draw it into his possession. So, because the Israelite, we assume that he's going to keep his word. So remember, Trumas Meiser is the portion that the Levite has to give 10% to the Kohen. So what he is saying, the Levite, that he's designating this produce, right, to give to the Kohen in its entirety, which will, even though it's only 10% he has to give, but he has other produce that he has to give. So he's going to designate all of this to allow him to have the other produce that will be considered as if he took the truma from that meiser to the Kohen. Even if it didn't come into his possession, the produce from the Israelite. Why? Because we assume that his word is going to be kept. If the Israelite gives it to another Levite, the first individual has nothing more than a complaint against him. Now, what happened if he didn't keep his word? So Yeah, he complained against him, but legally he has nothing against him. Because he kept if he changed his mind and failing to keep his word, the Israelite caused spiritual difficulty for the first Levite, or he caused him to violate transgression by partaking of the tithes. It doesn't create a financial liability, though. Okay, I would love to continue. I'm actually enjoying this because getting it, but I have to stop. Yeah.
Thank you.